Good morning. Can we please take our seats? I would like to welcome the Chairman of the Board, Mr. Sidney Campbell, Executive Management and Management of the Central Bank, members of the press, and other special invited guests. Thank you for joining us today at the Central Bank of Belize's 2024 press briefing. We are delighted to have you here as the Governor presents important information on the Central Bank and the economy. My name is Giselle Waite, Manager of the Exchange Control Department, and I will be your moderator for today's event. Let me start off by introducing the head table. Seated here today are members of the Central Bank's executive team. On the right, we have the Governor, Mr. Karim Michael. He will be guiding you through today's presentation. Mr. Michael has been Governor since 2021 and holds more than 20 years of Central Bank experience. Next, we have Mr. Hollis Parham, who is the Deputy Governor of the Finance and Administration Division. Mr. Parham also assumed office as Deputy Governor in 2021 and boasts over 40 years as a central banker. Finally, the Deputy Governor of Monetary and Financial Systems, Mrs. Leticia Murillo. Mrs. Murillo took over the policy arm of the bank in 2022 and has been with the institution for almost 20 years. Today, Governor Michael will provide you with updates on the economic landscape of Belize and highlight key central bank initiatives to promote monetary and financial stability for the well-being of Belize. Following the presentation, we will open the floor for questions to address any clarifications or concerns you may have. Without any further delay, welcome to the podium the Governor of the Central Bank of Belize, Mr. Karim Michael.
Chairman, Deputy Governors, colleagues from the Central Bank, media, feel like I haven't seen you guys in a while. I set myself up for that one. Warm greetings and pleasant good morning. Thank you again for joining us 11 months later. It has become customary as part of our deliberate efforts to continue to maybe share a little bit about the central bank with the public, to start off these presentations with this slide and this graphic. Again, the mission of our central bank is to promote financial and monetary systems stability for the well-being of Belize. Throughout this presentation, I think you will hear us talk about the well-being of Belize several times, and when we get into the project side, you will also see, well, I hope you'll see how much effort we put in to serving the public interests. We are currently living in what many have now dubbed an era of polycrisis. This is evidenced by heightened geopolitical tensions and conflicts, lingering supply chain issues, political deglobalization, and deepening fragmentation through trade, increased volatility, increasing cybersecurity threats, disruption through artificial intelligence, and of course, the climate crisis, among many others. At our core, and in the face of all these challenges, the Central Bank of Belize exists to provide stability and an enabling environment through the protection of our fixed exchange rate peg and safeguarding the essential services provided by our financial system, including protection of savers for the well-being of Belize. Now, there are many other facets to our mission, which includes the fact that we are the authority responsible for the underlying payment infrastructure and systems. We oversee remittance service providers and money lenders. We are the supervisory authority on AML/CFT compliance for financial institutions. We also play an important role, as I mentioned before, in promoting financial inclusion and in drafting the country frameworks for consumer protection and credit reporting. You'll hear a little bit more about credit reporting later on. This broadening of our mandate just beyond the traditional aspects of monetary and financial stability is our commitment to serve. Now, It's a simple agenda. There are two parts to it. We'll provide the economic context, referencing the previous 2-3 years. And then we'll switch into some of our strategic projects. We have selected 4 out of 50, well over 50, I think, strategic projects that we have put in place over the next strategic plan and strategic term. Let me start off by reflecting on our economic performance since the COVID pandemic. The Belizean economy has proved itself to be resilient. We have weathered the COVID pandemic, the oil price shock coming out of the Russia-Ukraine war, and weather shocks from Hurricane Lisa in 2022, and other adverse climate-related events. Today, we can confidently say that since the onset of the pandemic and these additional external shocks, our economy has fully recovered. Indeed, real GDP per person in 2023 was above what would have been implied by a continuation of pre-pandemic levels. So simply put, if we didn't have the shock, the dotted line here shows that real GDP per capita would have been somewhere around 13,500 per citizen, per person within the population. As it is, we're some $2,000 above that at 15,500. On the right-hand side, when we look at the growth among sectors, you could see that previously the primary and secondary sector, this dark blue and red, were affected by weather, disease, labor factors, including the high costs of fertilizer. And what you saw was that the tertiary sector, particularly services and tourism, was really driving economic performance in 2022 and 2023. Now, performance for this year, you can see that growth is now more broad-based. And this buoyancy of domestic economic activity year to date is expected to continue into the last quarter. Now, on an annual basis, the Central Bank of Belize projects that the economy will grow to about 7% in 2024. This annual growth outpaces the IMF's projected 2024 growth rates for several Central American and Caribbean countries, and is well above the average. The average is on the far right. This is for, again, for the Latin American Caribbean region, of 2.1% expected overall. You notice that we take out Guyana. Guyana is an outlier within the region, and it is around 40-something%, if not more. Looking ahead, the IMF expects global growth to remain stable at 3.2%. Remember, this is sort of underwhelming and depressed weekend growth. It's one of the lowest it has been since the IMF started to release global projections. And for the Latin America and Caribbean region, this growth is expected to average 2.5%. In Belize's case, the Central Bank of Belize again expects that growth will be around 4.1%, again exceeding the global growth and exceeding the Latin America and Caribbean region. And this should be above what the IMF says is our long growth potential output, which is again 2.5%. Now, that is part of the good news. The other part is that inflation pressures have weakened, and it is now trending downward. Now, while growth in real GDP terms, along with the rise in minimum wage, have helped to raise income, rising costs have partially offset these income gains for many Belizean households. Belizeans have faced tough trade-offs to stretch their dollar as they navigate trying to maintain living standards and manage expenses. Now, inflation has retreated from its 2022 peak of 6.3%. We are the red dotted line, to 3.6% in September. It is expected to dip further to around 3% or below in 2025. This range now might be the new normal, 2 to 3%. Now, this inflation experience has not been unique to Belize, but all countries have grappled with higher inflation since 2021. As the chart shows, countries have similarly begun to see inflation easing, largely reflecting by the unwinding of supply chain disruptions that we saw earlier in the pandemic, the easing of energy and commodity price pressures caused by the Russia-Ukraine war, and the effectiveness of monetary policy tightening seen in higher interest rates and slowing demand in advanced countries. Looking at the chart on the right, which is a very interesting chart, we see that in 2021 and 2022, inflation was largely externally driven, means imported through fuel and other imported food items. And this accounted for roughly 65% of inflation. This trend flipped in 2023 with increases in the prices for domestically produced food items alone contributing to 44.2% of inflation. Adding in services and domestically generated inflation accounted for 66.2% of total inflation in 2023. This persists or will persist in 2024, with the domestic component largely reflecting local food costs, restaurant service costs, and to a lesser extent, home rental prices, contributing to 63.7% of total inflation. And again, we're being hit by climate-related factors, which no doubt will continue to place upward pressure on our local fruits, vegetables, and even livestock. Continuing on the costs and inflationary environment within the country, while we can't directly, central bank can't directly impact the price that we pay on food, what we've been trying to do is lower costs on certain banking services. And I'm sure the media is well familiar with this battle. Earlier this year, the banks agreed to cap all ATM fees at 25 cents per transaction and reduce online transfer fees by over 50%. Additionally, the banks reduced fees for early payout on residential mortgages and removed fees for transfers between own bank accounts, and they removed fees for savings account maintenance. These fee reductions not only serve the purpose of giving some cost relief, but it also serves a financial inclusion purpose, an important objective for the central bank. Access to financial services, inclusive of access to cash, is essential for the financial inclusion and well-being of all groups of our society. However, a key challenge still exists regarding striking that balance between encouraging innovative, efficient banking and maintaining fair, accessible options for Belizeans. So on one hand, ATM fees and online transfer fees have been lowered, but on the other hand, fees for other services, such as over-the-counter withdrawal and check clearings, have increased. So the central bank's push for an inclusive fee structure is still unfolding. Starting next year, however, the central bank will be posting on its website and updating quarterly a list of the main fees for transparency and to encourage the consumer to be aware to compare bank fees to foster greater responsibility in their financial decision making. Also, and again, this is probably not things which can be considered good news. And another form of bank costs, the rates at which banks lend money, as well as the rate they pay for deposits, have seen little change over the past 10 years. Together, This implies that the interest rate spread, the difference between those two rates, has remained largely the same. The central bank acknowledges that there is still room for improvement in this area. This is a challenge, however, shared by the banking sector in many small countries that have similar market structures and macro environments that induce wider interest rate spreads. In our case, I think the situation is compounded by the fact that our system is so small, having just 4 domestic commercial banks accounting for the lion's share of the financial sector. The central bank understands that the cost of credit is crucial for economic growth and the well-being of businesses and households, and we monitor the behavior of interest rate spreads as part of our broader assessment of financial conditions. That is why later in the presentation you will hear of our credit reporting project, which is an initiative that seeks to remove one of the contributors of higher interest rate spreads. Now, back to the upside, our robust foreign exchange pool. I have mentioned this in previous press conferences, and I will say it again. We have a small, open economy, and due to that openness, foreign exchange is very critical for the functioning of our economy. So what is the level of our foreign exchange holdings today, and what are the conditions that underpin it? Currently, the foreign assets of the entire banking system, those held by commercial banks and those of the central bank, stand at 1.9 billion. And of this total, the pool of reserves, official reserves by the central bank, totals 1 billion, equivalent to 4 months of imports, comfortably above the 3-month benchmark. In contrast, the pool of foreign exchange held by the domestic banks are just under central bank's 1 billion at 900 million, and this is the highest it has ever been on record. Factors driving this performance are, of course, tourism leading the way at 1.2 billion, up almost 11.6% for the year to date. The year to date I'm referring to is January to September. Export revenue is up marginally by 1.1% or 10 basis points and totals 763 million up to September. FDI, very strong for the first 3 quarters of the year at 44%, up 195.4 million. BPOs helps to explain some of the labor market pressures or tightness, up total 169.1 million and up 7.4% for January to September. Remittances up small, 1.2%, 222 million. And loan disbursements, I don't mind this one being down at all, 15.7% and total $149.4 million. Now, of course, healthy growth in the banking system's foreign exchange has been largely underpinned by prudent fiscal management. Given the current macroeconomic backdrop, elevated inflation and high employment, expansionary fiscal spending would cause unnecessary stimulus that would only serve to stir import demand, leading to a faster drain on our foreign exchange pool. But this has not been the case. For the past 3 years, the government has kept primary spending below revenue receipts, generating primary surpluses averaging positive 0.5% of GDP. When coupled with a growing economy, the debt to GDP ratio, and this is remarkable, has steadily gone down from 103% of GDP at the end of 2020 to 64% of GDP at the end of September 2024. Over the coming years, however, the central bank expects a higher level of public investment given the urgent need to address structural challenges linked to the climate resilient infrastructure. And I think this is clear given our recent experience with Sarah, that it needs quite a bit of investment in infrastructure, climate resilient infrastructure, particularly for logistics, cargo, that sort of thing. Now, that's the first half of the presentation, and now we will turn to projects. The first one, exchange control modernization, and I had touched on this in a previous press conference before, but I'll start off with maybe some good news, depending on how you view it. As it currently stands, customers can go to an authorized dealer. Now, this is fancy terminology for a domestic bank who has been given the authority to sell foreign currency within our system and purchase foreign currency based on the type of travel. So if you're traveling for business purposes, as it stands now, you could get US $250 per day, while those traveling for medical and vacation purposes can get US $3,000 each. This is for the entire trip. The central bank has given these financial institutions this delegative authority via what we call Exchange Control Direction number 4. It's on our website for those who are interested. While those amongst may have been sufficient in the past, the central bank has deemed it necessary to revise these limits. For ease of doing business for the traveling public, the central bank will adjust those limits to be US $10,000 across the board despite travel type. This will go into effect in January 2025. We must mention that this is not intended to be a free-for-all. You must ensure that you can provide the tellers at the authorized dealers with your supporting documentation and that those are current and not expired. Also, if you're traveling with cash in hand, remember you have to declare this to the relevant authorities. Just remember that any requests above US 10K will require approval from Exchange Control Department of the Central Bank. I'm hoping that both on the customer side and also on the bank side, if you're giving somebody $10,000 US in cash, that you can simply issue that person a credit card to do the very same thing. So that's a message to both the applicant and also to the authorized dealer. Now, adjusting the limits for travel facilities is only the beginning of the modernization process for exchange control activities. The Exchange Control Department at the Central Bank has done a commendable job of responding to your requests on a timely basis. You can have your permits approved in approximately 24 business hours and other types of applications within 3 to 5 business days. And that's because we plan to make the process even more efficient and less onerous. The Central Bank has embarked on a multi-year project to strengthen the exchange control regime, supported by an IMF technical assistance mission. This project will focus on 3 overarching themes, namely updating the regulatory framework, which includes laws, regulations, directions, orders, procedures, essentially closing the regulatory or any regulatory loophole which may currently exist. Secondly, we intend to streamline the business processes and increase monitoring and enforcement efforts. Lastly, digitizing the entire application system as it currently stands. For those who have ever applied to foreign currency, you will no longer have to fill out a permit and email it to the central bank or print it and take it to a domestic bank. The goal is to have you input your information into an online portal, and you will be directed to your financial institution of choice to receive your foreign exchange. This is an important initiative as the foreign exchange application process has only been updated once in its entire lifetime, and that's because of COVID, where all applications were moved to being submitted via email instead of hard copies. This will make the purchase of foreign currency much easier for you, the customer. In the upcoming year, you will be able to apply. This is in addition to the increase in limits for travel, for higher amounts of foreign currency at the domestic bank, for more goods and service-based transactions. The plan is to remove the time-consuming nature of purchasing foreign currency, but keeping within our regulatory guidelines and the framework for defending the exchange rate peg. Now, turning to credit union, and we like that we have dubbed this the Credit Union Resiliency Project, and I hope some of the reasons why we have included the word resilience comes out. The central bank has also been working to bolster the resilience of the credit union sector. The entire financial sector has had to adapt with the evolving economic landscape, and the central bank has undertaken initiatives to build credit union resilience and to enhance competitiveness. In 2005, the central bank assumed responsibility for the regulation and supervision of credit unions when the central bank's governor was designated registrar of credit unions. Since then, the central bank has made strides to address laxities in regulatory oversight, and we have seen credit unions enhance their footprint in the sector with an asset growth to date of over 1 billion since 2006, along with expanding their range of product and services. In our latest strategy to build credit union resilience, the central bank has undertaken a two-pronged approach. Firstly, we're actively strengthening the credit union's legislation with the drafting of a new bill, regulations, and bylaws. The first Credit Union Act, which governs the sector, was enacted in 1944, with subsequent amendments and a partial revision only in 2022, before coming under the central bank's, again, as a reminder, regulatory umbrella in 2005. Redrafting credit union legislation ensures that regulatory frameworks keep pace with industry developments. Our second approach is to liquidate long inactive defunct credit unions. The credit union has identified 19 non-operational credit unions and have published a notice of liquidation order. Liquidating these entities helps to eliminate potential financial liabilities and risks to the overall financial stability and ensures the protection of members' interests. Ultimately, it keeps the credit union movement alive. By building credit union resilience and fostering a balanced regulatory environment, we're enabling credit unions to offer more competitive products and to grow sustainably. I now turn to the third initiative the bank has embarked on, and this is the establishment of a credit reporting system in Belize. I mentioned earlier in my presentation that interest rate spreads, which is an indication of intermediation costs, how the banks, credit unions have taken your money, your deposits, your savings, and have used those to lend, that's intermediation, have remained stubbornly high. One of the contributing factors of this is the information gap between those lenders and borrowers that lead to higher lending rates because they don't have information about the risks tied to you as a borrower. Now, a credit reporting system in Belize promises to expand access to finance, to promote financial inclusion, and to support a stable financial system. With access to a reliable credit reporting system, individuals who have been excluded from the formal financial sector can now build their credit profiles. This will allow more people to access loans, mortgages, and financial services. Now, let me go back to this slide before I continue. One of the big things we have to notice here is in the middle. 30% of Belizeans remain unbanked. The low-income households, rural population, and women primarily underserved by financial channels. This is the group that we're really aiming to grab in the formal financial sector. And again, access to more financial services is an integral component of financial development or economic development and job creation. Now, how will this work? Consumers will be able to build what is now known as reputational collateral through credit history. So shift your minds out of the traditional forms of collateral. We're talking about reputational collateral now. The CRS will expand the credit to credit and lower costs of credit for healthy borrowers. Consumers will be able to prove creditworthiness with non-traditional data, and I'll show that in the next slide. But it will also help to prevent over-indebtedness, with lenders better able to calculate a borrower's capacity to service his or her own debt. For lenders, of course, it will reduce asymmetries of information, meaning that the lenders will have a better understanding of a borrower's full credit history. It also promotes transparency and fairness, very key in the lending process, as all lenders will have access to the same level of information. It is harmonized. Access to this standardized credit information allows lenders to compete on interest rates and terms, benefiting consumers through better offers. And it allows the lenders to accurately evaluate risks, improving loan portfolio quality, and creating efficiency during the credit adjudication process. Now, I think we're stuck here. Okay, we're back up. This is the ecosystem that we're looking at for the credit information providers currently. What we want to point out is part of your credit score is actually how you have been paying your utility bill. So think when I mention and when I talk about non-traditional forms of assessing your credit history and repayment capacity, this is one of those things. Key players in the credit reporting system are these credit information providers. They provide credit data to the credit bureau and will include banks, credit unions, money lenders, utility, and insurance companies, DFC, and any other person that the central bank may designate. Importantly, credit information providers are required to obtain consumer consent prior to sharing information on a consumer to a credit bureau. This is a key point to note, and this is the protection of data angle. Next slide, please. So security is paramount when it comes to the consumer information stored and managed by the credit bureau as is provided for in the Credit Reporting Act. We assure the public that data security measures will be taken to protect consumer data from unauthorized access or breaches. In addition to data protection, consumers are entitled to know the information submitted to the credit bureau by a credit information provider and to access their credit information kept by the credit bureau. They will also be able to obtain a copy of their credit report free of cost once every year. These measures are bolstered by the wider measures of the central bank to ensure the protection of consumers, including the drafting of a financial consumer protection legislation for Belize. Next press conference, I'll expand on the Financial Consumer Protection Act. This year, we completed the Credit Bureau operator selection process and are pleased to announce that CRIF has been selected as a credit bureau operator with licensing on the way. CRIF operates in the region. It's an international global firm, very reputable. In 2025, system implementation begins, and we assure the public that the central bank will provide guidance and education on credit reporting, what it is, what to expect, and how to maintain long-term financial health. Now, to the big one. I would like to conclude with our final project, which there has been much public discourse about. I can officially announce to you that in January 2025, the central bank will unveil a new design to enhance security and counterfeiting protection while celebrating the legacy and heritage of Belize. I'll say now that you will all be invited. You will not be excluded from that unveiling. Next slide. I think Murphy strikes again. What could go wrong? Will go wrong. So, it was important that I start off with this, and I've stated it before in the central bank's press release. I must stress that while our new banknotes will look different, the value remains the same. Design does not equal value. A dollar is still a dollar. Our rate of exchange rate remains the same, which is two Belize dollars to $1. And just again, for more information, the removal of the monarch's portrait is not novel. This is not unique to Belize by any means. Belize will be joining a growing list of Commonwealth countries that once featured Queen Elizabeth II on their money, but no longer do today. The new Belize currency designs will honor recipients of the Order of the National Hero, Right Honorable George Cadle Price and Honorable Philip Golson. Here's what to expect. The new notes will have advanced security features to make them more secure. Your current notes will remain valid. Existing banknotes will be used alongside the new banknotes until the central bank has retrieved a large share of what is currently in circulation. We understand that this may take several or many years as citizens have monies stored all over their house and under their bed, and so that might take a while. And again, just to emphasize, the new designs will celebrate our culture and heritage. Our currency instills, to ensure that our currency instills a sense of national pride and identity. Later next year, and I'm projecting probably in the late third quarter, maybe, the notes will enter into circulation and be ready for you to use. Stay tuned. The reveal will be in January 2025. And this marks the end of my presentation. Again, we've selected only 4 projects. We have quite a bit more that I could have spoken about today, but we'll save that for the next press conference. To restate, the central bank continues to promote the stability and security of the financial system for the well-being of all Belizeans. I turn it back over to you, moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Michael. Let's give him a round of applause, please. Okay, we will now open the floor for questions. To ensure we address as many inquiries as possible, please keep your questions concise and limit them to the topics and information presented today. We ask you to remain conscious of everyone's time. Let's get started. The first question, please. Kindly step up to the microphone in the middle of the room, say your name and which media house you are representing. Let's not all jump at once.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Paul Lopez, News 5. So I want to ask a bit about the exchange control regulations, only as it pertains to an investigation that we've been conducting where it appears as if one casino in San Pedro has been operating an ATM that dispenses foreign currency. Now I understand that the exchange control regulations covers foreign currency and the National Payment System Act covers ATMs. But what I want to know is what sort of investigation has the central bank launched into this as a part of your mandate to secure Belize's financial sector?
Yeah, I'm sure you will appreciate that I can't say much on that because it is a live investigation and one that began well before your media house started to run this story. Uh, but whatever we do, we do under the powers given to us under the Exchange Control Act, and the regulations clearly state in addition, or the law clearly states in addition what steps or actions, penalties the central bank can take, whether under the Exchange Control or the National Payment Systems Act, and I'll leave it at that.
How much do you rely on the Gaming Control Board surveillance to detect suspicious financial transactions inside casinos?
Again, that's not within our remit. So we're this under the anti-money laundering and countering financing of terrorism framework, which the central bank is a member or part of NAMLAC. The central bank has supervisory authority for the financial institutions that I listed earlier in the presentation. Casinos and these other non-financial entities fall under another member of NAMLAC, namely the FIU. So I can't speak to the Casino Gaming Board and the regulator or the appropriate supervisory authority response to how they would deal with that situation.
So how would you all receive information or become aware of these sort of suspicious transactions, if not through the Gaming Control Board, through the FIU?
Yeah, absolutely. Because there again is the supervisory authority. Now there is an opportunity, I think this is what you're suggesting, is whether or not there can be greater cooperation among all entities such as this, because it is one anti-money laundering framework. And again, there's a NAMLAC committee where such things can be presented and tabled, and everybody is involved.
In what ways can these sort of unauthorized foreign currency exchanges disrupt the foreign currency market here in Belize?
Well, the thing that we fear is having a dual exchange rate within the system. This was evident when Casas de Cambios was legislated. So we saw in instances where the US dollar was bought not at $2 Belize, but it was approaching close to $3 in the heights of Casa de Cambios. So we don't want to create a parallel market and a dual exchange rate by having some other mechanism outside of the framework which currently exists dictate another price for US dollar.
Is it a common practice to have ATMs and casino machines in Belize under the National Payment System Act?
Absolutely not.
Sir, if we could touch a bit on the currency, the new currency note, just to talk a bit about the conversation surrounding how the value is attached to the face and the fact that it would be devalued that way. Can you speak to something like that a bit more?
I don't know how many other ways I could probably say it,
Yeah.
other than the fact that images are put on, images are replaced, and it doesn't change the fact that by law, the Belizean dollar is worth 0.5 US dollars or 50 cents US dollars. That's enshrined in law. It's in the Central Bank Act. It doesn't change how your currency look. So there's nothing else I could probably add on that.
Before I give my colleagues the mic, quickly back to my initial topic. These investigations, are the results made public, the findings of these investigations made public, and what sort of penalties can we look at in terms of operating an ATM inside a casino, more so one that dispenses US currency?
Good question. Under the NPS, the National Payment Systems Act, and the Exchange Control regulations, there's no requirement for those penalties if we proceed along those lines. There are no requirements for us to publish those penalties. However, violations under the MLTPA, again, strictly speaking, for the central bank's role as supervisory authority of the institutions which fall under it, there is some requirement for publication.
How is it? Go ahead, sorry.
But again, casinos do not fall under the central bank.
How is it that a casino can operate an ATM undetected for a period of time?
I got a better question. How is it configured? I mean, so.
Yeah, it's a good question.
So yeah. Again, the techies in my IT department could probably give me some idea. But yes, so the moment this thing started, obviously Belize is small, and I personally received direct messages from citizens in San Pedro that this was taking place. So that's when the central bank began to look into the issue.
Thank you very much for your
No
time,
problem.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. Next question.
Good morning, Louis Wade, Plus TV.
Good morning.
I wanted to start by congratulating the bank for getting us prepared to move into the credit score system. I think it is huge. You said that CRIF has gotten initial approval and paperwork and so on. Do we have a timeline for when we expect that credit rates, Belizeans will be able to know their credit rate? I know, I think I did an interview with Courts a couple of weeks ago, and they were trying to do their own initiative of working together with other local credit businesses to try to develop some type of system as a private initiative. So when can we expect this official initiative to roll out?
Deputy Governor, I'll pass it over to her.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for your question. We're looking at finalizing getting a credit bureau in place over 2025. What happens, we hope to license the credit bureau in early 2025, and thereafter the credit bureau will need to put together information, gather data. It can't just start without anything, so it will be putting its database together, and that might take some time. So we're looking towards the end or later on in 2025 to get all of that done, and hopefully the credit bureau can be fully operational in 2026. What happens too is that we need to sensitize the financial institutions. There's a lot of details that have to be worked out yet, and we also have to sensitize the public, because the credit bureau will not, the intention of the credit bureau is not to show up anybody or to say that you have a bad score, that you don't have access to credit. Quite the opposite. It wants to give everybody the opportunity and encourage everybody to make sure that you have good information in the credit bureau system so that you can have access to credit with financial institutions, and also to be able to access credit with the institutions. Thanks.
Thank you. My second question has to do with your statement that about 30% of Belizeans are still unbanked. They're outside of the system. primarily due to poverty. We've been hearing, at least over the last couple of years, poverty rates are going down. There was a changing in how it was calculated, and the current administration has not compared the old methodology with the new. They just use the numbers. And so it's been a dramatic fall, if I could put it that way, but on two different systems. We look at inflation. I saw your chart there shows that since the pandemic, the spike immediately after the pandemic, that it's been steadily going down and expected to go farther down in 2025. One of the problems with the U.S. election, we see that the Democrats were saying that the economy is doing well, but the people were saying inflation was extremely high, and it created a sweeping change in the United States. So we're here in Belize are saying inflation going down, poverty going down dramatically, unemployment going down, etc. It was right under the credit rating, under the credit rating diagram. But this, you said 30% on bank. My question is, would you have data over the last decade or so to show if there are less Belizeans that are unbanked? It's currently around 30%. What has it been before?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm sorry I don't have it readily available, but we can certainly send that to you. We don't have over the last decade. I believe our project started probably almost 5 years ago, and we have seen steady progress in the level of or improvement in those who are unbanked versus banked. So we have gained ground. However, I think we have flatlined, so to speak. We've now been stagnant for the past 2 years at around 68%, roughly 69%, and that's where you get the 30%. And you will never reach 100. Right. So that's, and I think I think we have a target of 75%, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head from what I recall, of where we want to be by a certain time frame. To your point that poverty, on poverty, I think it plays a crucial role, but also related to that is infrastructure. Some rural communities do not have necessary ICT, communication, that sort of thing. And then we also have the education and literacy challenge within those communities to bring people within the formal sector. And so we have to find ways in which we can address those other blocks or hindrance to the 30% underserved population.
All right. At least one last question before I kind of give up the microphone. I do have a couple more, but we could leave those.
The moderator will take you down.
Exactly. We don't want that. And I will do the one on the currency notes, because I've been observing the conversation in the public domain regarding the change of design. Did it originate from the central bank? Did it originate from cabinet? We know for sure it didn't originate from the people, which is why we are getting the feedback, because as a part of the People's Constitution Commission, we have traveled the entire country to find out the sentiments of Belizeans regarding our colonial past. It's linked to where Belize wants to go in the future.
Interesting.
And what we are receiving is quite the opposite from the direction that the bank is going as it relates to the currency notes. So where did the mandate come from? And why is it moving? Because the people are also not involved in the designing, they're on the outside. And so my opinion of the response has simply been, we don't want it, we don't like it, it's not going to be good for us. Just those types of conclusions. But where did the mandate come from?
Yeah, so another good question. With the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, the central bank it was made very clear to our central bank that when in the ordering of our current family of notes, that there will be a cutoff point where we will be allowed to keep ordering notes with Queen Elizabeth. Uh, there was a workaround where we could have backdated, but man, I don't like backdate anything. So the other option then is, well, you have to make sure you put the new head of the monarch on your notes. And we were faced with that decision. And obviously that presented an opportunity for us to really consider, should we continue going this way? And this is where that pivot began, or that's the sort of spark that changed it. But I will say...
Right, so just for clarification, it came from the bank.
Oh, I was getting to that, but yes, under the under the law, the bank is the sole issuer of currency notes. Now, how any design of currency notes are developed, it begins first with the bank. It is with the approval of the Prime Minister. So the bank has that mandate to design and issue the notes. Part of this issuance of new family notes has a very comprehensive communication plan where it requires that we properly educate the public on some of these very same things which I'm saying. And that will begin also in January straight through until when the notes are actually issued into circulation. So we do agree with you, based on some of the stories that have been ran, that yeah, there seems to be a sizable part of our population that, you know, strong ties to Mother England.
Yes.
I'll end there before I get myself in trouble.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Are you able to share how the bank arrives at the GDP, at the debt to GDP ratio, especially given that since the blue bond in November 2021 that led to a reduction, then the rebasing, the government has been going to the National Assembly to seek debt and to increase it, and you're still at 64%.
Yeah.
I am not sure how we're still there. Do you keep track of all the loans that the government goes to the house to?
Better than anybody else. We have a...
Please, because I'm confused how we're still at. We went
we-
down all the way to the 60s, but we're still there.
I should have done a presentation only on this. So you cited some of the factors. So let me see if I could quickly explain it and do so in simple terms. The rebasing, as you said, added 27% onto the previous calculation of GDP. Think about that. 27% of maybe 5 billion or 4 billion. Think about the impact of that. You're changing the denominator in your ratio. Now, the blue bond was roughly cut in half. I don't recall off the top of my head, but maybe somebody can help me here. So the blue bond was cut in half. You have other amortization that has been taking place as well, where we have, because of the fiscal discipline and prudence on the external debt side, that we have been repaying and reducing the principal balances on our entire loan portfolio, and we've been doing so effectively. Those changes, as well as others, and I kind of said that one day, those changes still don't, those changes outweigh any increase that you just cited on the domestic debt side in totality. So you might have domestic debt, which has been these supplemental bills going to the house, increasing by this amount, which has been completely overshadowed and outweighed by those changes, the rebasing, the retirement of existing loan obligations coupled and along with the blue bond that far outweigh those increases you see. And we have all the numbers to match that.
I would want to see those numbers. And when you say blue bond cut in half, you mean that it was reduced from the 100, close to 130% where we were at that time?
No. Sorry. I'm talking about the principal value of the blue bond.
Okay.
So if the blue bond was close to 600 or maybe 550 million US, that principal amount that we owed was sliced, was cut. So the 133%, which I think you're referring to, is the debt to GDP ratio
at that time.
that existed before the rebasing. Like I
And
said,
before the blue bond.
absolutely, you're right.
Okay. Have you also, Venezuela, those negotiations have not yet concluded to contribute as well to a reduction in debt to GDP ratio?
It hasn't been officially placed in our
Okay.
numbers yet because there's still some formality and obviously some things within foreign political relations that need to be worked out.
My next question is whether the bank has done any kind of assessment to determine if whether as a result of the fee structure changes introduced by domestic banks after the PD7 negotiations, whether customers are actually paying more than what we were paying before. And I know that it would be nuanced because you have some customers who may use checks, others who completely do not, some who go into the bank and conduct their transactions there and so, but
Yeah.
any kind of insight, because people looked at it as if they were being vindictive and obviously only going after more money.
And I can't argue against that view at all. I will say that the increases on this side should be less than the overall activity within the financial system. So the way how online transactions have been growing and growing exponentially versus how many people still actually want to go into a bank and wait in line to do over the counter. And also, I think it is slowly sinking in within those people who are still using checks that it is not the way to go. There are better ways to conduct financial transactions, but I'm not the one to tell somebody who has his entire system built around checks to move away from checks. It's unfortunate that there was a spike on the other end, but our objective is financial inclusion and increased access to services within the financial system. And when we talk about services, more efficient, more digital forms of payment. And one of the other projects which we will talk about the next time is our fast payment projects. I want everything to be on the access from your phone. That's what we should be doing and what we should be moving towards.
In relation to the inflation figure, how is that calculated? Are there any discrepancies or limitations? Probably based on the indicators that are looked at, especially when Jan Public, the average Belizean, goes to the store and sees that prices keep going up even after you're saying that they started to normalize after the pandemic.
I completely trust in the Statistical Institute of Belize in ensuring that its methodology meets the international standard for calculating a consumer price index, and the basket which account or the components of the basket in that for the calculation of CPI represents the average, what an average household would put in that basket. This is not a figure owned by the central bank, but we report on it.
And then,
Last question.
okay, when it you allowed Paul a whole lot. I don't have a whole lot, and
Paul
they're not
asked about
very
one
fun.
investigation.
I
Paul,
actually
know.
wanted to
He
ask
has
you in
3.
relation to that, like, has that, I don't want this to be my last question, though, so I'm going to.
All right, you get brought up. You get one brought up.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in relation to that, has the bank ever found something like that happened before? An ATM inside a,
No.
okay. And then in relation to transactional limits, I am not certain whether that existed before, but I note
You're referring to what transactional limit, Marisol?
domestic banks, at least one bank,
Okay.
I don't know that the other that I bank with has introduced them, but when I inquired about, so what they do is that, let's say you're using your credit card, you can only swipe or purchase at a point of sale and an online transaction. So both of those, there's a 10 day, a limit per day of 10 transactions.
Depends
And then-
which grocery shop you go. Because
And
some
then-
tell you $20, some tell
No,
you
no,
15.
no, no, no. So it's
Not
a,
that?
it's a different thing. So I can only make 10 purchases per day, whether I'm using an Uber.
Credit card side.
Right.
Okay.
So whether I'm using an Uber or I'm going to a store and using my credit card to pay.
Yeah.
So they've introduced these transactional limits, and when I inquired about it, they're saying it's due to anti-money laundering measures. So I want to know if the central bank is aware of this. They have said, though, that they will make changes to it next year, stating that the user themselves will be able to lift that block on your credit card, because it can really cause problems for you.
I know all too well about it.
Especially if you're
Yeah.
traveling, right? So yeah, and I'll leave it at that, even though I had like 2 more.
You want me to answer that one then? No, right? I'm fine.
Well, I mean,
Yeah. I'm aware
you're
that
aware and
that a bank or some banks might have
done
these limits in place. I
And-
will.
and I mean,
I'm not
my-
speaking on behalf of the banks.
My thing about
by the
it
way.
is it's my money. And at the end of the day, you want to get more money from me. So, but at least charge me 25 cents more per the additional transaction rather than leaving me hanging
Not
dry.
suggest that, Marisol.
I saw you.
Not suggest that, man.
Huh?
Not suggest that
Not
yet. No.
But I mean, it's really limiting, and it's bad. Like, that's how I consider it. You're putting limitations on me and how I use my money. Well, no, it depends how you use your credit card. But, yeah, so we're not going to touch that one. So then let me ask this one. Out of curiosity, how do you determine that 30% figure of unbanked people in Belize? Is it that you depend on the surveys carried out by?
Yeah, we have regular surveys carried out
Okay.
in conjunction with the Statistical Institute of Belize.
All right. I think. Oh, last one. How do you
Last
prevent
one.
fraud?
Last one.
Who they send you message?
No, I write them down.
Go ahead.
I write them down.
Yeah.
Yeah, not using notebooks. How do you prevent fraud in relation to the online transactions that you started for the applications for foreign exchange?
Well, currently the system isn't where we want it to be through the online portal. So the process that is in place is just replacing hard copies with soft copies sent via email. So there's hasn't been any increase or notice from our end that there's anything fraud, if you use that word. There's no incidence of multiple permits being used by one individual across all the banks in Belize. And that's the only thing that would probably jump out at us. So we haven't noticed any of that. The online portal obviously will make that more secure by the way how it is designed and some of the checks and balances that will be working behind the scenes. What also happens is that currently under this system, we get the physical return of those copies back at the central bank. A very manual process. The people in research would comb through all of these, making sure things check out, and then that helps us to create what we call our balance of payments position. We want to see if we can do all of this digitally while maintaining the integrity of the entire system and framework.
Thank you too. Next, Media House.
Good morning.
Morning.
Benjamin Flowers, Love News.
Morning, sir.
I have a question regarding the credit score system. Rolling out anything new will undoubtedly come with some bumps in the road. What type of monitoring and evaluation systems are going to be put in place to ensure that the rollout is being effective?
So there's a credit reporting system act. So that gives us more than enough powers to put in place the proper procedures, the proper rules, and the proper reporting mechanism. I've highlighted some of the things here already where the customer or the applicant holds the power. He's the one or she's the one to authorize the release of her personal score. And of course, the way how we've gone about licensing and selecting through a proper procurement process of CRIF with international reputation already gives us some sort of comfort that we're bringing in somebody that has the necessary infrastructure to reduce this risk. I think the Deputy Governor didn't want to say exactly what we feel, but we're not here to name and shame anybody. That's not the point of this at all. We want to give you a unique identification of which your score is attached to it. And you can use this based on that score and the reputational collateral that you have built over time, that you can go then and have the possibility of accessing more financial service to you. So within the framework, within the infrastructure that we put together, plus the fact that you own and control how your information is released, and the fact that we have a vendor with the capacity to roll out such, we're very comfortable that it will minimize that risk, which I think you're suggesting.
Awesome. Another question, just with relation to the credit union side of things.
Uh-huh.
You said that you guys were clamping down on 19 defunct credit unions. That's a lot. Has that inspired maybe any changes to regulations or anything like that to make sure that we don't end up in that sort of situation again?
That's the objective, actually. I said in the presentation that the Credit Union Act was put in place in 1944, with only one incident of revision taking place, and only 2 years ago. The 19 credit unions which I referred to, most of them would have been defunct from well before the central bank took responsibility through the office of the governor as registrar. And some of these are credit unions with 50 members. These are not extremely large credit unions. But there are one or two who had quite sizable assets. And maybe 5-6 years ago, we had made an effort to properly liquidate those credit unions, but that project was halted for different reasons. So now we're doing all that were registered on the books with a mandate to deregister all of those 19 from well over 20 years ago by the end of 2025. And the Credit Union Act obviously seeks to prevent this sort of thing from happening again.
Thank you.
Thank you too, Mr. Vasquez.
Ah, crap.
Good morning.
Moderator, do your job. Do your job, moderator. Yeah.
Jules Vasquez from Channel 7 News. I pray your indulgence. If I could, you spoke about the phenomenal outturn for the GDP. Would you say, and maybe you did, but would you say that tourism is the main driver of this phenomenal growth?
Yeah. So maybe if I could go back, I'll get there eventually. Yeah. So in 2024, one of the things I mentioned was for the year to date, growth is more broad-based. You can see primary, secondary, and tertiary sector actually being around the same sort of growth rates. Overall, when you look at the aggregate, if I were to take the total value by primary, compare it to the secondary, and compare it to the tertiary sector, of which tourism is a component, is the larger share of economic activity, and that's widely known within our country.
Now, you also spoke about inflation, and you know that it's starting to trend down. I had recently read, you know, and I'm reading a quote. It's from the United States, so I understand it's not a direct analog. Why at a time of falling inflation, low unemployment, and relatively high economic growth do voters appear so unsatisfied with the state of the economy and in how the administration is handling the economy, right, which Louis alluded to earlier. And then it quotes these IMF analysts who pointed out, and again, this is United States, but that the official inflation measure used to take home prices and mortgage interest payments into account. If it still did, inflation would have peaked at nearly 18% in 2022 in the US, about twice the current consumer price index in the US. And if we measured inflation as the Bureau of Labor Statistics did in the 70s, the recent bout of inflation would have been even higher than the worst of the 1970s. Again, all in the US, I understand it's not a clear analog. But my question is, are we missing something in how inflation is measured by strictly using the consumer price index and not taking into account other things that affect the amount of disposable income available to simply keep a family alive?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think my response to Mr. Wade touched on the fact that it depends how or what goes into the basket of which CPI is based. Now, you may very well be right in that that basket needs to be looked at and examined if it's representative of the common things which an average household is facing. So I agree with you. And then, but that's not me. I mean, that's not the central bank to look at. That is definitely what the SIB, and I'm sure the SIB looks at its methodology frequently. There's the common methodology. These are all the tools that we have. You have the consumer price index, and then you have the producer price index. These are things which should be constantly evaluated according to best practice and methodology.
When we look at the tourism figures that we discussed, we understand that a large part of tourism revenues are not banked in Belize. We know this; it has been a chronic problem for decades. Even if you see it as a problem, but is the figure of tourism revenue intrinsically skewed because so much, you understand how it works far better than I, so much of the reservations are booked online and they are banked in US accounts that never make it onshore. Has anyone been able to calculate a percentage of how much of, especially for accommodations or tours, how much of these tourism-related expenditure is unbanked in Belize?
I think we have discussed this, at least at the research level, several times. We may have done some preliminary work in trying to look at that more in depth. But from a macro perspective, when we compile the balance of payments, everything should add up, right? Because there's a errors line at the bottom, which has to be within certain limits. But all that information that feeds into our balance of payments, including those tourism figures, helps to explain how we are paying, for example, a huge merchandise trade deficit. So no matter if, and I hope you understand what I'm saying, even if 45% of that is kept outside, or maybe 70% percent of it is kept outside, in one way or the other, it is used to pay for the same imports that any hotel may need for renovations and all of that. And that is reflected in our merchandise trade deficit because it's imports.
But you're not taking into account the black market.
Oh, I might not introduce that to me. I don't measure anything what I can't say.
It's everywhere. It's how I measure everything.
If I can't get data on it, Mr. Vasquez, then I can't include it in my numbers.
Which leads me to the other question.
Yeah.
We saw recently that a large amount, 10 million lempiras, they said, I guess a few $100,000 Belize of tobacco exports were intercepted between Belize and Puerto Cortes, Honduras. How does the bank treat with this? We know successive administrations have held this tobacco is legal in Belize, but we know also that it is exported illicitly to multiple countries in the region, Central America and Mexico, and thus the proceeds they do not perhaps meet optimal standards for banking. The transactions, anecdotally, are in cash because of the nature of the trade. But it's a huge part of our exports and a huge part of our imports. How does it show up? How is it metered in the national statistics?
Well, I'm glad you pointed out first that if the transactions were to have been officially part of a financial system, that the central bank, along with the commercial banks and other entities, have a transaction monetary system in place that would ask questions if it had entered there. As far as the trade, if it's legal, we will see it. If it's official trade, we will see it in the numbers. If it's unofficial through these maybe less than formal ports, then obviously we won't see it. It is like somebody walking across the border with a head of cattle. You don't see that all the time. So similarly, if it crosses a official border point, we'll pick it up because it has to be recorded. Or I hope it is. And if it's not, then I really can't say anything else about it.
Is it your opinion that the proceeds of these sales are banked?
Like I said, I can't see it. We're not seeing it in the numbers, and if they are, then we have to investigate more.
Well, I ask because we saw this this burglary at the free zone. Again, a law enforcement matter, not a matter for you, but it has to excite the attention or attract the attention of the regulator. When I'm told that the amount stolen was over 40 million pesos in cash, right? Now the amount recovered so far has been substantially less. But I'm saying that apparently, anecdotally, and by police, we know that there are large stockpiles of liquid cash in the free zone.
Yeah, I hope those remain in the north or go north.
Fair enough. Sir, I'm taking up too much of your time. Please, just a few banking matters. Excess liquidity. It's in the hundreds of millions. It must be 600 million now.
Uneven, just like the share of foreign assets, heavily skewed at one financial institution.
Heavily skewed at one finance. Should the bank, as regulator, seek to somehow penalize or fine any bank that hoards excess liquidity?
Difficult question, has been proposed several times. Finding the best mechanism to do that, we haven't reached there yet. And similar to how we have looked at fees, might have unintended consequences. Yeah.
So at this point, it just has to remain as is, which
Well-
affects lending.
Well, I've said this before. Part of what we have to do is to create more competition within the industry, one. And that's one side. The other side is also the demand. And how do we get more participation from society, from our population, within the financial system? So there has to be demand. And it has to be a way in which once there's demand, that then loans can be more easily administered and issued. So we're working on addressing it from that side with one of our projects. But solving the issue of competition is difficult. You have to import a bank, or you have to get credit unions up to a level.
Okay, and then finally, and I thank you for your indulgence. In May, the attorney for the Feinstein Group asked the bank to appoint an investigator into what it said were irregularities at Atlantic Bank. Have you all concluded this investigation? And reports say that a fine was assessed at the end of that investigation. Can you update us on this?
I don't think that question from Mr. Feinstein, or the request, was to the central bank to do an investigation. I'm not sure, but obviously the central bank can only act within the remit of the laws which it is governed. And the central bank has its surveillance mandate, its prudential oversight mandate, which it takes very seriously. So we've been monitoring and surveilling all banks within the financial system. And once we have issued certain directives and actions pertaining to weaknesses which we see within their practices, then the central bank takes action. It is not driven by the request of somebody else.
Okay, but was a fine assessed for, we know that there was the allegation of related party transactions or related party business on the Stake Bank investment.
The central bank has fined financial institutions routinely, and did fine 2 institutions this year.
That's as non-specific as you can get, sir.
That is as specific as I can get.
Okay, I thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. For what? The fines?
Yeah, what was the fine?
In totality, we found probably around 500,000 for the banks, the financial institutions. Yeah. For both of them.
Is there any more questions from the audience? No? I think we're good. Okay, thank you all for your participation and engagement here today. This concludes our question and answer segment. We hope you are able to glean some insights into the Belizean economy and how the central bank is playing its part in improving the well-being of Belize. If you have any follow-up questions, kindly contact us using the email provided, info@centralbank.org.bz. If you would like to speak to an individual, the bank's point of contact is Ms. Jacqueline Dragon. So before we adjourn, I would just like to thank the Central Bank's planning team for organizing today's event, and you, the audience, for your attention and attendance here today. With that, I say thank you for coming, and have a great day.
Thank you.